You were never Grandma's favorite. She would have wanted me to have the ring. My brother said that in front of 71 people at my grandmother's funeral luncheon. Then he smiled. 3 days later, the oldest pawn shop in our county called my phone. Everything I believed about my family changed with a single sentence. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 39 years old. This is the story of how my brother secretly sold our grandmother's wedding ring before anyone even knew it was missing, and how one unexpected phone call exposed a betrayal that had been building for years. At the time, I thought we were simply grieving. I had no idea my grandmother had already prepared for exactly this moment. I grew up in Brookfield, a quiet town of just under 18,000 people where everyone knew which families had lived there for generations. Our grandparents' farmhouse sat at the end of Oak Ridge Road. The white wooden fence leaned a little farther every year. The porch always smelled of fresh coffee and cedar. Inside, the grandfather clock chimed every hour. Grandma Leaner kept everything spotless. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, and homemade bread. Her wedding ring never left her hand. Not once. She married my grandfather, William Carter, on June 18, 1959. She wore the same gold ring every single day for 63 years. To everyone else, it looked simple. To our family, it represented everything: loyalty, sacrifice, commitment. After Grandpa passed away in 2018, Grandma often twisted the ring around her finger whenever she talked about him. She once told me quietly while we sat on the porch watching the rain, "This ring isn't valuable because it's gold. It's valuable because of the promises behind it." I never forgot those words. My older brother, Brian, rarely visited. He lived 2 hours away. He always had a reason: work, business trips, traffic, the children were busy, there was always another excuse. I lived 15 minutes from Grandma. I became part of her daily routine without ever planning to. Every Tuesday I brought groceries. Every Thursday I drove her to physical therapy. Every Saturday morning I mowed the lawn before we drank coffee together on the porch. I never kept track of the hours. I simply showed up. Brian called often, always cheerful, always affectionate. "Tell Grandma I love her. I'll come next weekend. I'm just swamped right now." Sometimes he came, usually he didn't. Grandma never complained. She defended him every time. "He's busy, he has responsibilities. Don't be hard on your brother." I listened. Then I quietly changed the light bulbs, repaired the porch steps, filled her prescriptions. Life continued that way for almost 7 years, then everything changed. Grandma suffered a stroke in early February. I still remember the exact date, February 6. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Machines beeped steadily around us. Doctors moved quickly through narrow hallways. Brian arrived almost 4 hours after I called him. He hugged Grandma, cried beside her bed, stayed until dinner, then drove home. I stayed all night. That pattern repeated itself for months. By summer, Grandma needed daily assistance: bathing, cooking, medication, transportation, paperwork. Some nights I slept in the guest room because she was afraid of falling. Brian continued calling, continued making promises, continued telling relatives how involved he was. No one questioned him. Confidence sounds believable, especially when nobody checks. The first time I realized he was rewriting history happened at Grandma's 84th birthday. 43 relatives gathered in the backyard. Children chased each other between picnic tables. The smell of grilled hamburgers drifted across the yard. An aunt hugged Brian. "I don't know what your grandmother would do without you." Brian smiled. "We're all making sacrifices. We." That single word landed harder than I expected, because it wasn't true. He had visited 6 times that year. I had visited more than 300. I looked toward Grandma. She was laughing with the great-grandchildren. She hadn't heard the conversation. I stayed quiet. That became my habit. Silence often looks like agreement. The second incident happened 6 months later. Grandma was admitted to the hospital again after another fall. I spent 8 straight nights sleeping in the reclining chair beside her bed. The vinyl left marks on my arms. The vending machine coffee tasted burnt. The fluorescent lights never turned off. Brian arrived on the 7th day. The next morning he posted a picture online. The caption read, "Taking care of Grandma, family comes first." The photograph showed him holding her hand. I wasn't in the frame. Hundreds of people praised him. Comments poured in. "What an amazing grandson. She's lucky to have you." I stared at my phone, then placed it face down. There was nothing to say. The third incident crossed a line. It happened 2 weeks before Grandma died. Several relatives visited for Sunday dinner. 31 people filled the house. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and fresh biscuits. While everyone talked, I stepped into the kitchen to refill Grandma's tea. When I returned, I heard Brian speaking. "I've basically been handling everything for years." People nodded sympathetically. One cousin asked how he managed balancing work and caregiving. Brian laughed. You do what family requires. I stopped walking. The teacup felt warm against my hand. Grandma sat only a few feet away. She heard every word. She looked at me, then quietly lowered her eyes. She didn't embarrass Brian. She didn't argue. Neither did I that evening after everyone left. Grandma sat beside the living room window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. She slowly removed her wedding ring for the first time in my life. She placed it in my hand. The gold felt warm from her skin. "Keep this safe tonight," she whispered. "I don't want anyone borrowing memories that don't belong to them." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled gently. "You'll understand someday." The next morning she asked for the ring back. I slipped it onto her finger. Neither of us mentioned the conversation again. 10 days later, Grandma Leaner passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 84 years old. I was sitting beside her bed when the nurse quietly said the words no one is ever ready to hear. Brian arrived 45 minutes later. For a little while, we were simply two grandsons grieving the woman who had raised us. Then the funeral arrangements began. And everything changed. The funeral took place 4 days later, a cold Thursday morning. Gray clouds hung low over Brookfield Cemetery. 71 people attended, neighbors, church members, former coworkers, friends who had known Grandma for decades. The service itself was beautiful, simple, exactly the way Grandma would have wanted. People shared stories about her kindness, her generosity, her quiet strength. For 1 hour, grief united everyone. Then we moved to the church fellowship hall for lunch. Coffee brewed in the corner. The smell of fresh rolls filled the room. Old family photographs sat beside Grandma's favorite Bible. At first, the conversations were gentle. People laughed through tears, remembered childhood memories. Then Brian stood. He picked up the microphone. "I just want to thank everyone for being here." People smiled. He spoke about Grandma, about family, about sacrifice. Then his voice changed. "I know Grandma appreciated everything I did for her during the last few years." Several relatives nodded. He continued. "Some people only showed up near the end." Then he looked directly at me. "Across the room, you were never Grandma's favorite. She would have wanted me to have the ring." The room froze. No one spoke. No one laughed. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me, waiting, expecting me to defend myself. Instead, I quietly stood, placed my untouched coffee on the table, walked outside. The February wind felt colder than before. I stayed there nearly 20 minutes. When I finally returned inside, Brian was surrounded by relatives accepting sympathy. Nobody mentioned the ring again, at least not that day. 3 mornings later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "Mr. Daniel Carter?" "Yes, my name is Samuel Green. I own Green's Pawn and Jewelry downtown." I frowned. "I think you have the wrong number." "I don't believe I do." He paused. "Did your grandmother recently pass away?" The question stopped me. "Yes, I need you to come to my shop." "Why?" Another pause. "Because I think something that belongs to your family was brought to me." 20 minutes later, I parked outside the oldest pawn shop in Brookfield. The bell above the door rang softly as I walked inside. The room smelled of polished wood and old leather. Glass display cases lined the walls. Mr. Green greeted me quietly. He was nearly 70. His family had owned the shop for over 40 years. Without saying another word, he unlocked a drawer beneath the counter. Then he placed a small velvet tray in front of me. My heart stopped. Grandma's wedding ring. I recognized the tiny scratch inside the band immediately. I had seen it hundreds of times while helping her wash dishes. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Mr. Green folded his hands. "Your brother sold it." The words echoed through the room. "He said your grandmother wanted him to have it." I couldn't speak. Mr. Green continued. "I believed him at first." He reached beneath the counter again, then produced an envelope. When I cleaned the ring before displaying it, I found something hidden inside the jewelry box. He carefully unfolded a yellowed piece of paper. Grandma's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The note was dated 8 months earlier. It read, "If this ring is ever offered for sale after my death, please contact Daniel Carter before completing any transaction. He will understand why." I stared at the paper, unable to breathe. Mr. Green continued quietly. "I've known your grandmother for 30 years. When I found this note, I stopped the sale immediately. I called the number she left. It was my phone number. Grandma had planned for this. She knew someone might try to sell her wedding ring." Tears filled my eyes for the first time since the funeral, not because of the ring, because Grandma had trusted me enough to protect it. Mr. Green handed me another document, the original pawn receipt. Brian had accepted only $4,850 for the ring, less than half its appraised value. The signature at the bottom belonged to him. The date shocked me even more. He sold it. The morning after Grandma died, before the funeral, before anyone even knew it was missing. I looked up slowly. "What happens now, Mr. Green?" answered calmly. "I refuse to complete the transaction." The ring still belongs to your grandmother's estate. I also kept security footage every second. Every signature, every lie. I immediately called Harold Bennett, Grandma's executor. An hour later we sat together inside his office. Harold reviewed the pawn receipt, the handwritten note. The security footage, his expression never changed. Finally, he removed his glasses, then said one sentence. Your grandmother expected exactly this. He opened her estate file. Inside was another sealed envelope, addressed specifically to him. He broke the seal, then began reading aloud. Harold, if my wedding ring is ever missing after my death, I ask you to investigate before distributing my estate. My heartbeat slowed. Harold continued. I have watched Daniel quietly care for me every week. I have also watched Brian become interested only when something valuable was involved. The room remained silent. Then Harold reached the final paragraph. If Brian attempts to sell my wedding ring, I want this letter read in front of the entire family before my estate is settled. I looked at Harold. When he closed the folder, Saturday, the final estate meeting was already scheduled. 39 relatives had confirmed they would attend. Harold looked directly at me. Bring nothing, I'll bring the truth. Saturday arrived, the same fellowship hall, the same families, the same people who had heard Brian claim Grandma's ring belonged to him. Harold began with ordinary estate business. Savings, investments, property. Then he stopped, opened a separate folder. As executor, he said calmly, I have a responsibility to correct the estate record. The room became silent. He held up the pawn receipt, then the security photographs. Then Grandma's handwritten note. Every eye turned toward Brian, his face lost color. Harold explained everything, the attempted sale, the hidden note, the security footage, the date, the amount. Every fact, every document. Then he read Grandma's final letter aloud. When he finished, nobody spoke. Brian stared at the floor. Finally he whispered, I can explain. Harold shook his head gently. The documents already have. Then came Grandma's final instruction. The wedding ring would pass permanently to me, not because it was valuable. Because, in her own words, the ring belongs with the grandson who protected the promises behind it. Brian looked at me. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The estate closed 2 months later. Several relatives apologized. Many admitted they believed Brian for years. Mr. Green personally returned Grandma's wedding ring to me. Today it rests inside a small wooden box beside a framed photograph of my grandparents. I never wear it. It was never mine to wear. Its purpose isn't to remind me of gold. It reminds me of character. What did I lose? The belief that family always protects family. What did I gain? Proof that the truth often survives because one honest person refuses to ignore it. And what do I understand now? People can steal jewelry, they can steal credit, they can even steal memories, but they can never steal the truth. I didn't inherit Grandma's ring because I asked for it. I inherited it because I protected what it represented.